Tonight, we embark upon a journey not of war or conquest, but of scent, wind, trade, and time. This is the story of the maritime spice routes, a winding web of oceanic paths stretching from the ancient ports of the Indian subcontinent to the far-flung markets of Europe, from the sun-kissed isles of the Banda Sea to the bustling streets of Calicut, Zanzibar, and Malacca. Close your eyes and imagine a time before maps, when sailors watched the stars, when cinnamon was as precious as gold, and a single nutmeg could buy a house in Amsterdam. You may have heard of the Silk Road, a trail of deserts and caravans, but there was another road, flowing with water and wind, older than empires, more enduring than borders. This is the sea-bound story of spice. What were spices really? Yes, they added flavor. But far more than that, they preserved food, healed wounds, masked odors, played roles in sacred rituals, and formed the beating economic heart of ancient and medieval economies. To understand the maritime spice routes is to understand how oceans became highways, how knowledge rode the monsoon winds, how Islam spread peacefully through ports, and how tiny islands like Ternate and Tidore held sway over kings. This is not a tale of a single place. It is the living geography of ancient Indonesia, India, Arabia, and East Africa, of Portuguese caravel sails appearing like ghosts on the horizon, of Chinese junks, Arab dhows, and Malay prahus. Let the sound of history become your lullaby. Each chapter we visit will be like stepping into a spice-laden breeze, passing through centuries without haste, as we drift ever forward softly, deeply into the ocean of time. Now, with your body at rest and your mind open as a gentle shore, let us begin our voyage. Let us drift now, back before recorded history, before borders, before empires, before even the idea of east or west. Imagine a dugout canoe, simple, narrow, carved by hand. It rocks gently on the warm, shallow waters of the Andaman Sea. A fisherman paddles slowly, guided by the tides and his memory. In the distance, jungle-covered islands rise from the horizon, and in his boat rests a bundle of aromatic bark cinnamon. He will trade this for obsidian, or perhaps for dried fish. This moment, simple as it seems, is part of something vast. It is part of the earliest maritime exchange networks in human history. Even in the Stone Age, long before the word spice existed, people followed the winds. Spices are some of the oldest traded goods in the world. As early as 2000 BCE, cloves from the Maluku Island Steiny, volcanic isles in modern-day Indonesia, were found buried in ancient Mesopotamian ruins. How did they travel so far? The answer is slowly, through hundreds of hands, across thousands of miles, on foot, by raft, by sail, from jungle villages to harbor towns, from village chiefs to scribes in Babylon. At first, maritime trade hugged the coasts. This is known as coastal navigation. Seafarers rarely lost sight of land. They would move from one safe cove to the next, across the Arabian Sea, along the Indian coastline, down to East Africa, and onward to Southeast Asia. These early voyages relied on rhythm, not maps, on stars and wind, on inherited knowledge passed from father to son, sailor to apprentice. The monsoon winds are perhaps the quiet protagonists of our tale. These seasonal winds, blowing northeast in winter and southwest in summer, create a reliable current in the Indian Ocean. By the first millennium BCE, sailors had begun to understand and exploit this pattern. Arab, Indian, and later Malay and Chinese mariners timed their departures with the monsoons, allowing them to cross vast distances with relative safety. A Dowan, elegant wooden ship with a single large triangular sail setting out from Oman in early November. Its crew speaks Arabic, but their cargo holds carry Tamil pepper, Indonesian nutmeg, and Persian turquoise. They ride the northeast monsoon across the sea, bound for the rich markets of Calicut or Sri Lanka. In 6 months, they will return on the opposite wind, bringing back textiles, ceramics, and perhaps even elephants. This cyclical journey powered not by empires, but by climate laid the foundation for the spice routes. By 1000 BCE, ports had begun to blossom along the Indian Ocean rim. Muziris in India, Oman's coastal markets, the Swahili towns of East Africa. Each served as a node in the vast web of pre-modern exchange. Muziris, now lost to time and silt, was once a dazzling city on India's Malabar coast. Greek and Roman ships anchored there, hungry for pepper what they called black gold. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder would later complain that Rome was draining its wealth to feed its appetite for spice. In these ports, transactions were often wordless. Different languages, customs, even belief systems collided. So traders developed systems: goods left on shore, examined at distance, then counteroffers made. A slow, cautious dance of trust tone honed over centuries. And everywhere the air was rich with scent: pepper, cardamom, ginger, frankincense, saffron. Each spice had its own geography, its own root, its own myth. Let's turn now to the west. By the time of the pharaohs, Egypt was already a hub of spice traffic. Ships from the land of punt-likely modern Somalia or Eritrea brought myrrh and frankincense up the Red Sea. These resins were burned in temples, used in embalming, and considered sacred. By the time of the Ptolemaic dynasty, around 300 BCE, Egypt's Red Sea ports became critical waypoints between the Mediterranean world and the Indian Ocean. From here, the maritime spice route connected to the Nile, then to Alexandria, and finally, to the heart of Rome. In fact, Roman-era texts describe ships called musonius, large ocean-going vessels, setting sail from Egyptian ports like Berenike and Myos Hormos. They rode the summer monsoon eastward, sometimes reaching the pepper-producing lands of Kerala in just 40 days. For a Roman senator in snowy Gaul, the scent of black pepper in his stew might have begun its journey in a rainforest half a world away. As you rest here in thought, you may wonder, why all this effort? Why cross oceans, brave storms, barter with strangers just for flavor? But spices were never just flavor. In the ancient world, they were medicine, ritual, preservation, even status. Pepper could preserve meat. Clove could soothe a toothache. Nutmeg was said to ward off plague, and saffron bright and golden was more valuable, ounce for ounce, than gold. In China, India, and the Islamic world, spices held deeply rooted roles in traditional medicine. In Europe, their scarcity made them objects of prestige gifts for kings, tools for diplomacy. To possess spice was to possess power. Finally, we reach the mysterious origin point. The Molucca Salso, called the Spice Islands, a small archipelago in what is now eastern Indonesia. This is where nutmeg and clove trees grow wild nowhere else in the ancient world. Tiny islands like Ternate and Banda, often volcanic and mist-covered, produced goods that traveled to India, then to Arabia, then to Rome. But the islanders never saw Rome, and Rome never knew the islands. It was the sea that connected them, like a whisper passed from person to person. The spice routes were a relay of trust, scent, and distance. As we close this first chapter, we rest in a world just waking to global connection. There are no empires of the sea yet, only wind, curiosity, and the lure of scent. The ocean sleeps beneath the moon, and in its currents, history begins to stir. Let us sail now into the next age, an age of empires, explorers, and expanding sails. As we sail gently into the next era of our story, the ocean becomes more than a passage, it becomes a political force. Coastal towns grow into city-states. Maritime exchanges blossom into vast commercial systems. And along the warm, glittering rim of the Indian Ocean, new empires rise shaped not by armies, but by sails and scent. We find ourselves in the first few centuries of the Common Era, when the rhythms of trade align with the rise of organized kingdoms. The ports of India hum with activity. Arab dhows are a common sight along the East African coast. Chinese ships venture further south, and religion like spice becomes a commodity that travels. This chapter is not one of conquests by sword, but of cultures meeting softly on the wind. Let us begin with the winds of the 7th century. In the deserts of Arabia, a new faith emerges, Islam, and with it, a new maritime network takes shape. The early Muslim world stretched quickly from Spain to India, but it was not only a land empire. Arab traders, many of whom were deeply familiar with Indian Ocean navigation, became the backbone of maritime commerce. They sailed dhows across the Red Sea, down the coast of East Africa, to the Persian Gulf, and across to Gujarat, Sri Lanka, and the Indonesian archipelago. Imagine the port of Muscat in the 9th century. Arabic calligraphy flows across sails. The sound of prayer echoes through harbor streets. In the market, date syrup from Basra is exchanged for Malabar pepper, and merchants discuss price and faith in the same breath. Islam, as it spread through these trade routes, adapted to local customs. It wasn't imposed, it arrived gently, through marriage, through port communities, through the long rhythm of commerce. Soon, the entire Indian Ocean became a kind of Muslim lake, not in the sense of domination, but of shared culture, language, and economic practice. Swahili merchants in East Africa used Arabic script, Indian Muslim dynasties sponsored shipbuilding, and Indonesian sultans built mosques facing Mecca beside Hindu temples. Now let us drift to India's western coast. The Malabar coast, with its coconut palms and monsoon rains, becomes one of the richest regions on earth. In cities like Calicut, Kollam, and Cochin, the scent of black pepper fills the air. Arab, Persian, Chinese, and even Jewish traders jostle politely in crowded markets. The Zamorintha ruler of Calicut welcomes foreigners. He doesn't control an empire by land, but by sea. His authority depends on regulating port access, ensuring fairness, and maintaining a cosmopolitan spirit. Here, spice is not only a product, it is the lifeblood of diplomacy. These ports become models of global harmony. A Gujarati Muslim sailor partners with a Hindu spice broker. A Chinese envoy gifts porcelain bowls in exchange for sandalwood. A Swahili merchant offers gold and ivory from Africa's interior. The Indian Ocean, unlike other imperial frontiers, remains relatively peaceful in this era. Because the wealth flows when the waves are calm. Let us sail west now, to the long, sunlit shoreline of East Africa from Somalia in the north to Mozambique in the south. This is the Swahili coast, not a single kingdom, but a string of city-states: Lamu, Mombasa, Kilwa, Zanzibar, each independent, each linked by trade and a shared language. Swahili itself is a beautiful hybrid, a Bantu base, rich with loanwords from Arabic, Persian, and even Hindi, a living symbol of cultural fusion. Picture Kilwa around the year 1200. The Great Mosque rises near the harbor. Gold from inland Zimbabwe arrives by caravan. Slaves, ivory, and leopard skins are loaded onto ships bound for Arabia and India. In return come textiles, ceramics, and spices: nutmeg from the east, incense from the desert. These African cities were not peripheral, they were vital. They were full participants in the spice economy, and their wealth can still be seen in the coral stone buildings and ancient coins found buried in sand. At night, Swahili sailors sang to the stars, navigating not by compass, but by memory, by moonlight, and by faith. As we drift further east, we arrive in the maze-like waterways of Southeast Asia, Sumatra, Java, the Malay Peninsula. These lands become crossroads of cultures. Indian religions take root, Hinduism and Buddhism flourish. Scripts, architecture, and court traditions mirror the subcontinent. But they do not erase local identity. Instead, a rich hybrid culture is born. Spices are everywhere: nutmeg and clove in the Maluku Islands, cinnamon in Ceylon, camphor and benzoin in the jungles of Sumatra. In this world, the Srivijaya Empire emerges. Centered in Sumatra, it controls the Strait of Malacca gateway between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. Any ship passing through must pay tribute. Imagine a harbor under Srivijaya's watch, Chinese merchants arriving with silk and lacquerware, Indian traders offloading cotton cloth, local ships bringing rattan, birds of paradise feathers, and gold dust. All under the watchful eye of a Buddhist king who keeps a navy, not to conquer, but to protect trade. Srivijaya's wealth lies not in land, but in water. It is the first true maritime empire of the spice world. Let us slow our pace now and listen to the ordinary. A trader sharpens his quill to copy a Persian poem. A sailor boils rice while his son carves a miniature boat. A woman barters for peppercorns using tiny cowrie shells as currency. The docks are filled with smell and sound, the tang of salt water, the spice of ginger, the clatter of ceramic jars. Men load sacks of dried clove onto a dhow, children splash near the wooden piers, monks walk quietly with saffron robes brushing the sand. In these ports, time flows with the tide. People rise with the sun, rest when the heat grows thick, and gather in cool courtyards after dusk, sharing stories from lands they've never seen. This is the human heartbeat of the spice route, not kings or empires, but the gentle continuity of trade and trust. What is remarkable about this Indian Ocean world is not how divided it was, but how united. There were no passports, no colonial flags, no global powers yet. There was instead a shared understanding, a culture of mutual benefit, of religious tolerance, common weights and measures, and multilingual negotiations. From Zanzibar to Java, a Muslim merchant could find food, prayer space, and kin. A Hindu broker could thrive in an Arab port. A Chinese sailor could hire a local Malay guide and journey south. The ocean did not separate people, it connected them. Its shores were lined not with enemies, but with cousins in commerce. As this chapter draws to a close, we float on a sea that is deeply human, where the rise of Islam, the strength of port cities, and the flow of spice have created a civilization unlike any other. It is a world that glows quietly in the moonlight, waiting for dawn, and for the next turning of the wind. Let us rest now as our ship sails eastward toward a new chapter, the arrival of China and the great voyages that would change the map forever. As we glide gently into the 15th century, the waves whisper in a new tongue, Mandarin. And at the heart of this turning tide stands a fleet so grand it dwarfs anything the world has ever seen. The Chinese, who once gazed inland to mountain and river, now turn their eyes seaward. From the courts of the Ming dynasty, an armada of treasure ships begins to sail. These are not ships of conquest, but of diplomacy, prestige, and spectacle, and their wake would ripple across the maritime spice world, linking Asia's great ports into a single sea of influence. Let us step first into the Forbidden City. It is the early 1400s, and the Ming dynasty, newly established, seeks to reaffirm its place as the Middle Kingdom, the cultural and political center of the known world. The emperor, Yongle, is ambitious. He rebuilds Beijing, commissions encyclopedias, and orders the construction of the largest wooden fleet in human history. His goal? To announce China's return to power. Not through conquest, but through awe. Ships are built in Nanjing massive vessels over 120 meters long. They are called baochuan, or treasure ships. Sailing ships with 9 masts, compartmentalized hulls, and golden dragon figureheads. These ships will not carry armies. They will carry gifts, porcelain, silk, tea, lacquerware, and return with tribute, spices, gems, exotic animals, and recognition of Chinese supremacy. And at their helm sails a remarkable man. His name is Zheng He, born to a Muslim family in Yunnan, captured as a boy, castrated, and raised in the Ming court. But Zheng He rises not only as a court official, but as a navigator, diplomat, and commander of China's greatest naval endeavor. Between 1405 and 1433, he leads 7 voyages across the Indian Ocean, visiting more than 30 countries from Vietnam to Kenya. Imagine his fleet approaching, dozens of treasure ships flanked by escort vessels, supply ships, and water carriers. Flags billow, gongs ring, and crowds gather. At Calicut in India, the local ruler receives golden scrolls and elaborate gifts. In the Maldives, Zheng He exchanges silk for cowrie shells. In Malacca, he helps stabilize the region, supporting a new sultanate that pledges loyalty to the Ming. And in East Africa, at Mogadishu, Lamu, and Malindi, he receives giraffes, lions, and zebras to present at the imperial court. Zheng He is more than a sailor. He is a bridge between worlds. A Muslim serving a Confucian emperor, speaking through gifts rather than swords. But what were these places Zheng He visited? They were not scattered outposts. They were nodes in a thriving maritime network, each with its own language, currency, faith, and specialty. The Strait of Malacca becomes central. Controlling it means controlling trade between the Indian Ocean and the South China Sea. And Malacca, once a fishing village, now flourishes. Zheng He's support turns it into a sultanate. Muslim traders flock to its shores. Indian, Chinese, and Arab merchants anchor safely in its harbors. It becomes the new model port, open, diverse, loyal to China, and deeply embedded in the spice trade. China does not colonize these places. Instead, it creates a system of tribute. Local rulers offer symbolic gift tusks, spices, or rare animals, and in return receive lavish Chinese goods and imperial favor. This is a diplomacy of dignity, a soft empire floating on trade winds. Let us pause and explore the goods moving across this sea. From China, silk in brilliant reds and greens, fine porcelain with cobalt glaze, lacquered boxes, and carved jade. From Southeast Asia, camphor, benzoin, cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon bark, and sandalwood. From India, pepper, cotton textiles, turmeric, ginger, pearls. From Arabia, frankincense, myrrh, horses, and gold. From Africa, ivory, tortoiseshell, leopard skins, giraffes, and enslaved laborers. These goods do not move quickly. They pass from hand to hand, from port to port. A clove harvested in the Banda Islands may pass through 6 ships before reaching China. A Chinese porcelain bowl may rest on an Ethiopian table. Everything is in motion: goods, people, ideas. Let us sail now with the traders. A Tamil merchant on the Coromandel coast, recording pepperweights in a palm leaf ledger. A Malay pilot navigating by stars, using rhyming chants called pantun to remember routes. A Chinese interpreter keeping careful record of dialects in Java. A Persian apothecary grinding cardamom into oil, sold to a Buddhist monk from Sri Lanka who believes it will cleanse the spirit. And somewhere on the Arabian Sea, a mother tells her son the story of the Chinese admiral who once brought a giraffe. The world is a circle of stories, carried not by empires, but by ordinary people making a living across extraordinary seas. Religion, too, travels with the tide. Islam spreads further east, not through conquest, but through merchant communities and intermarriage. Mosques appear in port towns from Aceh to Guangzhou. Hinduism and Buddhism travel with pilgrims and books. Sanskrit texts arrive in Java. Buddhist monks from Sri Lanka study in Chinese monasteries. Chinese herbal medicine meets Indian Ayurveda. Arabic astrology enters Chinese courts. Food, fashion, and architecture blend seamlessly. In this time, ports are cultural workshops where a Tamil temple might stand beside a mosque and a Confucian shrine. The sea does not separate beliefs, it gives them room to meet. And then, abruptly, it ends. In 1433, after the 7th voyage, the new emperor of China halts maritime expeditions. He fears cost, internal corruption, and the threat of Mongol invasions from the north. The fleet is dismantled, shipyards are closed, records burned, China turns inward once more, and so, the greatest navy in history vanishes beneath the waves of time, not defeated, but dismissed. The ports still bustle, but the great Chinese sails are no longer seen on the horizon. Still, their memory lingers. In the architecture of Malacca, in African tales of pale-skinned giants, in porcelain shards found across the Indian Ocean. Zheng Hu's voyages were not conquest, but contact, and their echo continues in every spice jar, in every port city where cultures meet. As we drift toward the end of this chapter, the sea grows quieter, but the network remains. A web of ports, alliances, and cultural ties still humming with life. And now the horizon darkens again as new sails approach. This time they are foreign. They come not to trade, but to control. The age of exploration is about to begin, and with it, a different rhythm to the spice world, sharper, hungrier, and far less gentle. Let us rest for now, as we prepare to witness the arrival of the Europeans and the reshaping of the spice routes in fire and faith. The sea, once calm and rhythmic, begins to stir with unfamiliar winds. Dark sails rise on the horizon, rigid, angular, unlike the billowing junks and lateen sails of the East. It is the late 15th century. The spice world, long navigated by Arab, Indian, Chinese, and Southeast Asian traders, is about to be challenged by foreign powers armed with cannons, charts, and a different dream. The age of exploration has begun, and with it, a profound rupture in the rhythm of maritime life. For centuries, Europe knew the East only in fragments, peppercorns in a Venetian market, silk in a noblewoman's gown, spices in the apothecary's box. The overland Silk Road brought these treasures at great cost, taxed, stolen, and handed off across empires. When Constantinople fell to the Ottomans in 1453, Europe's access to Eastern goods grew even more restricted. A new urgency took hold. Find a sea route to the East, one that bypasses the Muslim intermediaries and brings spices directly to the Christian world. Portugal, a small kingdom on the edge of the Atlantic, leads the way. In 1498, after years of experimentation and shipwrecks, a Portuguese fleet, led by Vasco da Gama, rounds the Cape of Good Hope, that stormy southern tip of Africa, and sails into the Indian Ocean. He lands at Calicut, a thriving spice port on the Malabar coast of India. There, da Gama is received with suspicion. He brings woolen cloth, tin trinkets, and no tribute, nothing of value to seasoned Indian merchants. And yet, da Gama marks a turning point, for he has opened the sea route from Europe to India, and others will follow, bringing not only goods, but gunpowder and greed. The success of these voyages is not luck, it rests on new maritime technology. The Portuguese caravels, swift and able to tack against the wind, is a marvel of engineering. Paired with the lateen sail from the Arabs, the magnetic compass from China, and the astrolabe from the Islamic world, European ships can now sail further, faster, and with greater precision. But what truly tips the balance is the cannon. Mounted on the decks of caravels, cannons allow small fleets to dominate large ports. Trade becomes less negotiation, more imposition. By the early 1500s, Portugal seizes control of key maritime choke points. In 1510, they capture Goa, establishing a base for further expansion. In 1511, Afonso de Albuquerque storms Malacca, slaughtering many and planting the Portuguese flag in the heart of Southeast Asia. Soon, they take Hormuz at the mouth of the Persian Gulf, and then the vital island of Socotra near the Red Sea. These are not mere trading posts, they are fortified outposts with garrisons and governors. Europe's maritime empires are born not through settlement, but through control of trade routes. The Portuguese aim to monopolize the spice trade, fix prices, and eliminate Muslim and Asian competition. Spices now flow into Lisbon pepper, cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, transforming it into one of Europe's wealthiest cities. But this control is fragile. Asian traders do not submit quietly. In Gujarat, in Aceh, in the Red Sea, Muslim merchants mount fierce resistance. Ottoman fleets challenge Portuguese ships in the Arabian Sea. Local rulers form alliances to push back. But not all resist. Some adaptations. Malay and Indian ports become hybrid zones where Portuguese, Persian, Arab, and Javanese ships mingle. The spice routes are not erased, but reshaped. A Gujarati trader might now sell cloves to a Portuguese factor, who ships them to Lisbon, where they are sold again to Dutch or English merchants. Each layer adds complexity and often exploitation. With the Portuguese come stone fortresses, built not just to defend, but to dominate. In Goa, churches rise beside coconut groves. Jesuit missionaries arrive, preaching Christianity, often with imperial backing. Trade becomes entangled with faith. Conversion, colonization, and commerce blend into a single enterprise. Factories, trading posts with storage and soldiers dot the coasts. At Cochin, Colombo, Malacca, Macau. These are not factories in the modern sense. They are compact, fortified enclaves where trade is tightly controlled. And at their center is always the spice ledger measured in sacks of pepper, barrels of nutmeg, and crates of cloves. By the late 16th century, Portugal's monopoly begins to crumble. Its empire is overstretched, its enemies emboldened. Enter the Dutch and the English. In 1602, the Dutch East India Company is founded. A private corporation with government backing, it raises capital, builds fleets, and wages war, all in the name of profit. Soon after, the British East India Company follows suit. The spice trade, once the domain of wandering merchants and royal envoys, is now run by multinational corporations, answerable not to emperors, but to shareholders. They bring with them bureaucrats, mercenaries, and detailed maps. The Indian Ocean becomes a chessboard. The Dutch, in particular, seek control at the root, literally. Rather than buy spices from locals, they seize the Banda Islands and establish nutmeg plantations. To enforce their monopoly, they massacre local populations and import enslaved labor from other islands. Monoculture begins, one crop, one owner, one price. Spices become more abundant in Europe, but the diversity of Asian agriculture suffers. Where once small farmers grew a mix of rice, bananas, and cloves, now entire islands are turned into spice factories. The flavor of empire is bitter for those who toil in its service. As we reach the end of this chapter, we must pause and listen. The sea, once filled with the chants of Tamil sailors, the laughter of Arab merchants, the songs of Javanese fishermen, now echoes with new sounds. Gunfire, church bells, cannons saluting flags. The Portuguese, and later the Dutch and British, have not simply entered the spice world. They have rewritten its rhythms. Ports become colonies. Markets become monopolies. Trade becomes control. And yet, even in this upheaval, the old networks persist. A Malay captain still sails his wooden boat to Makassar. A Chinese junk still crosses to Java. A Tamil trader still whispers the names of winds. The sea remembers. Now, as we gently sail into Chapter 5, we leave behind the first wave of conquest and enter a world of competition, rebellion, and reinvention. We will see how Southeast Asia became a battleground of empires, and how the spice trade evolved through resistance, hybrid cultures, and the slow rise of modernity. Let your mind rest now, floating gently on this tide of history. We will resume, when you're ready, with the next leg of our quiet conquest. The sea remains constant, but those who sail it, govern it, and harvest its spices have changed. The old monsoon networks still whisper across the Indian Ocean, but now they are hemmed by European forts, mapped by imperial cartographers, and taxed by distant capitals. As the 17th and 18th centuries unfold, the story of the maritime spice routes becomes one of entanglement between empires and islands, ships and shorelines, and above all, between power and resistance. By the early 1600s, Portugal's maritime empire is weakening. Their hold on the seas, once unshakable, now faces rivals who are more organized, better financed, and less reliant on the crown. The Dutch East India Company, known as the VOC, emerges as the dominant maritime force in Southeast Asia. With its headquarters in Batavia, present-day Jakarta. The VOC rules not just trade, but territory, taxation, and lives. Dutch ships patrol the Banda Sea. Nutmeg trees are guarded. Markets are surveilled. And yet, the British are not far behind. The British East India Company, more focused on India in this period, begins to assert itself in Bengal, Madras, and Bombay. Not as conquerors, but as cunning traders. They too crave cloves and cinnamon. They too build fortresses and arm their ships. And so begins a maritime Cold War, one of shifting alliances, blockades, and merchant espionage. In 1621, the VOC commits one of the most chilling acts in spice trade history, the Banda Massacre. Banda, a cluster of lush volcanic islands, was the only place on Earth where nutmeg grew naturally. When the islanders resist Dutch attempts to monopolize the trade, the VOC responds with brutality. Thousands are killed. Entire villages burned. The survivors are enslaved or displaced. The Dutch then import laborers-enslaved people from other islands to work the new plantations. The nutmeg monopoly is enforced not by negotiation, but by eradication. It is a stark reminder. Spices, once symbols of warmth and luxury, are now soaked in the politics of violence. And yet, despite conquest and control, local societies adapt. In the spice islands of Ternate and Tidore, Islamic sultanates continue to rule, balancing diplomacy between the Dutch and Spanish. In Makassar, a multicultural port city, traders from China, Arabia, India, and the Malay world defy Dutch embargoes. They sail in quiet coves, trade under moonlight, hide cloves beneath sacks of rice, and keep alive the older rhythm of the monsoon world. Language itself becomes a fusion. Portuguese words mingle with Malay and Arabic in market slang. Even architecture adapts. Dutch gabled roofs in Batavia are built with Javanese timber and guarded by Malay soldiers. Colonialism reshapes the spice world, but it cannot fully erase it. By the 18th century, a new idea is growing in the halls of Europe, that of scientific exploration. Colonial botanists, many trained in the ideals of the Enlightenment, begin to catalog, map, and classify the natural world. Spices become subjects of study. Their growth, their medicinal properties, their propagation. Botanical gardens rise in Calcutta, Buitenzorg, and Kew. The French send expeditions to steal clove seedlings from the Dutch. The British smuggle nutmeg trees to Ceylon and Grenada. The Spanish try to grow cinnamon in Mexico. Knowledge becomes power, and the imperial control of spice routes moves from the sea lanes to the gardens, the greenhouses, and the ledger books of empire. As European powers spread, spices are no longer tethered to their islands of origin. Cloves, once confined to the Moluccas, now grow in Zanzibar, Madagascar, and the Caribbean. Nutmeg, once guarded in Banda, is planted in Mauritius and Penang. This decentralization breaks the old monopolies. Spices become global commodities traded on futures markets in Amsterdam and London, stored in imperial warehouses, blended into global cuisine. But as spices spread, their mystique begins to fade. What was once rare is now routine. Pepper is on every table, cinnamon in every bakery. The age of empire has globalized flavor, but at the cost of place, origin, and ancestral guardianship. Still, the sea remains a space of rebellion. In the 18th century, local uprisings flare up. The Bugis fleets of Sulawesi defy Dutch taxes. The Achenese rulers resist British encroachments. Chinese pirate kings like Zheng Yi and Qing Shi disrupt spice convoys in the South China Sea. Navies rise from the archipelagos. They use traditional vessels like the Penjajap and the Lenong Sleek, fast, and perfectly suited for hit-and-run raids. These rebels are not merely criminals. They are heirs to older maritime orders, fighting to preserve a sea that once flowed freely. They speak in sails and storms, and their legacy lingers in the stories still told in seaside villages. Even as empires draw maps, local people draw memory. In the shadow of forts, shrines to sea deities still stand. In the spice gardens, prayers are whispered before harvest. The monsoon, the great invisible engine of maritime life, continues to guide both fishermen and traders. And in oral epics, the names of ancient spice merchants are sung often as heroes, sometimes as tricksters, always as part of the living sea. The spice trade, though transformed, retains its spiritual depth. It is not only commerce, it is connection, culture, and continuity. As we near the close of this chapter, we float gently along a sea whose surface bears the scars of conquest, but whose depths still echo with ancestral wisdom. The age of empire has altered the spice routes, made them more violent, more organized, and more global. But the older rhythms endure. The turning of the tides, the whisper of the wind through clove trees, the quiet gathering of cinnamon at dawn. Empires rise and fall, but the ocean remains, carrying memory in its salt and silence. Let your thoughts drift now as we prepare to journey into the final leg of our voyage. In Chapter 6, we will explore the fall of the colonial spice, monopolies, the rise of national independence movements, and the legacy of the maritime spice routes in our world today. Close your eyes if you wish. Let the scent of nutmeg and sea air lull you. The conquest may be quiet, but its echoes are eternal. The sails are folded. The great trading ships rest in harbors now lined with cargo containers. The caravans of cinnamon and nutmeg are no longer carried by monsoon wind, but flown in climate-controlled jets across hemispheres. Yet the story of the spice routes, their power, their poetry, their pain, continues to echo through our world. In this final chapter, we wander gently through the remnants and reverberations of a journey that began with fragrant bark and sacred seeds. Let us trace how spice, once worth their weight in gold, still shape culture, commerce, and cuisine, even in an age far removed from the ancient maritime winds. By the mid-19th century, the empires built on cloves and cinnamon begin to crack. The Dutch, weakened by wars in Europe and resistance in Asia, loosen their grip on the Moluccas and Java. The British, increasingly focused on industrial textiles and tea, shift their priorities from spices to systems of extraction and governance. The once fierce rivalries between European powers give way to bureaucracies, plantations, and global markets. In place of royal charters and fortified ports, colonial corporations run spice estates with wage labor. But the world is changing. Nationalist movements stir in the archipelagos. Poets, teachers, and farmers begin to speak of independence. By the mid-20th century, Indonesia, India, Sri Lanka, and Zanzibar all reclaim their sovereignty. The colonial spice monopolies dissolve, leaving behind both wounds and wisdom. With political independence comes cultural revival. In the hills of Kerala, traditional Ayurvedic spice gardens are replanted. In the islands of the Moluccas, local farmers form co-ops to grow and export nutmeg on their own terms. The knowledge once dismissed as native lore is now recognized as agroecological science. Clove curing, pepper grafting, and cinnamon harvesting return to ancestral methods. Not because they are nostalgic, but because they are sustainable. In Zanzibar, school children learn the history of the spice trade, not from foreign textbooks, but from elders who lived the later chapters. This is not merely the past being remembered, it is being reclaimed by those who kept the seeds alive through centuries of conquest. And in our time, the story of spices continues in new arenas. Scientists study curcumin from turmeric for its anti-inflammatory properties. Cinnamon is researched for its effect on blood sugar. Clove oil finds use in dental treatments. The spice that once commanded wars now sits in laboratory vials, tested under microscopes, mapped in molecular chains. And yet, even in this clinical precision, the mystery lingers. Why does nutmeg soothe the mind? Why does black pepper enhance absorption of nutrients? Ancient herbalists may not have used the term bioavailability, but their practices were precise, their results observable. Modern science, it seems, is rediscovering what the spice roots once knew intuitively, that the natural world is medicine, if we listen carefully enough. Today, the legacy of the maritime spice routes is in our kitchens: garam masala in India, ras el hanout in North Africa, curry powders, jerk seasoning, faux broth, 5-spice blends. Each tells a tale of encounter and exchange, of adaptation and appropriation, of flavor meeting flame and fusion. The route from clove tree to curry dish may be hidden now, but it is still there, a chain of human hands, from Banda to Bombay, from Zanzibar to London. We taste history in every bite. Across the world, efforts grow to preserve the memory of the spice roots. In Indonesia, restored forts and plantations now serve as museums and cultural parks. In Sri Lanka, cinnamon trails are mapped for tourists and students alike. In the Netherlands, exhibitions reflect on the colonial spice economy, its wealth, its wonder, and its violence. Artists, too, respond. Poems are written in the voice of a cinnamon tree. Installations recreate the scent of spice ships. Dancers move like tides, telling the story of the monsoon winds. In these spaces of reflection, the spice trade is no longer a tale of profit alone. It is a mirror, revealing who we are, what we valued, and how the smallest things, bark, seeds, blossoms, have shaped the destinies of empires. And so, we arrive at the end of our voyage, from ancient canoes to colonial frigates, from sacred groves to scientific labs, from oral tales to shipping invoices. The spice routes have traversed time as much as space. They whisper that commerce is never only material, that every trade is also an exchange of language, belief, and memory. That the ocean, though fluid and vast, holds the shape of human intention. What began as a longing for fragrance and flavor became a global movement of cultures, ideas, and identities. And though the wars have ended, though the caravels no longer roam the sea, the conquest continues in quiet, everyday ways. In the warmth of chai, in the glow of curry, in the healing balm of clove oil, the spice routes live on, not as battles or borders, but as bridges linking past to present, place to place, person to person. Now, as we close this journey, let your breath soften. Picture the ancient ports, lit by lanterns, heavy with scent, the ship stall and silent, waiting on the tide, the hands brown, calloused, ink-stained passing sacks of spice from one world to another. Let your thoughts dissolve into the salt air. Let your dreams follow the monsoon winds, for in this quiet conquest, there are no victors, only voyagers, still sailing. Good night, traveler. Sleep gently. Your voyage is complete.